The next book I have to talk about is from a genre that I really don't read much in, and I don't think I've reviewed much at all. But I was pleasantly surprised with this. It's called An American Childhood by Annie Dillard. Some of you might recognize Annie Dillard's name. She's probably known as one of the better memoirists to come out of the United States over the last, I'd say, 20, 30, 40 years. This and Pilgrim at Tinker Creek are probably her two best known memoirs slash autobiographical pieces of writing. It's not often that I read memoirs. They seem, as a genre, a little self-indulgent sometimes for me to spend several hundred pages mulling over at a time. I think I remember mentioning this to a friend of mine shortly after I graduated from high school, a friend whose passion for books mirrored my own and who genuinely appreciated my interest in 19th century German philosophy. In response to what I told him of the memoir and my experience with it, he mentioned the name of someone named Annie Dillard, who I'd never heard of before, and said that I might like An American Childhood or Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. I shelved these suggestions, so to speak, and not thinking too much of them in the intervening 10 years or so. And then a few months ago, I saw a pristine copy, this one, the one I just showed you, of An American Childhood at a library book sale, an annual library book sale for only about $1. There's this beautiful, I don't know if you got to see it very well, but I'll hold it up again, this beautiful John Kane painting on the front, which is called Panther Hollow, Pittsburgh. It seemed quaint and sort of reassuring and comforting, and it spoke to me for some reason. I immediately thought of Will, my friend, and our long talks, and somehow, all of a sudden, this memoir in particular struck me as something that I think I would really, really enjoy. If not just for the sake of going down memory lane. Some of Dillard's childhood is eerily close to home for me. Her open and universal sense of curiosity for all kinds of books, those on rocks and minerals, history and science, her childlike need to understand, to classify, to organize. Other aspects of her early life may very well have taken place on another planet, at least for me. She grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood, attended a private school, often frequented country clubs with her parents, and, as she says, grew up in a house full of comedians. I can't relate to any of that stuff. Dillard's writing, though, brings out the full sense of what it might have felt like to grow up in the United States in the 1950s. It's full of nostalgia, but not the mealy-mouthed, saccharine kind that we usually associate that word with. She loves the order of life, or at least she did when she was a child. Her mother stayed at home while her eccentric father brought home the bacon, but also her eccentric father planned and actually set out on a Mark Twain-inspired jazz-infused journey from Pittsburgh, where An American Childhood takes place, all the way down to New Orleans on the Mississippi River. Incidentally, he soon returned from his trip well before he reached New Orleans from sheer loneliness. Annie was largely left to her own devices as a child to read, to look at diatoms and euglena through her beloved microscope, and to attend school dances. But Dillard also catches with really touching beauty how crushingly small and how insular all of this could really be. She didn't know this as a child, surely, but She knows, excuse me, she knows as a writer looking back that this smallness of 1950s America can have whole worlds constructed out of it. And that's precisely what she sets out to build, both in her childhood and in this book. The way she combines her wide open curiosity with what is in some respects its opposite, the feeling of suburban provincialism of Protestant Pittsburgh, is still one more thing that makes this writing very special for me. I always found Dillard to be a good storyteller in American Childhood, but sometimes she mixes in short, insightful, quasi-philosophical asides, like this one on page 157 on personality, after recalling her two friends Elin and Judy and her little sister Molly. She writes, "People's being themselves year after year so powerfully and so obliviously, what was it? Why was it so appealing? Personality, like beauty, was a mystery. Like beauty, it was useless. These useless things were not, however, flourishes and embellishments to our life here, but that life's very center, they were its truest note, the heart of its form, which drew back our thoughts repeatedly." In a few spots, Dillard mentions her interest in lepidoptery. Just a few pages later, after the quote that I just read from, she paints one of the most memorable images in the entire book, that of a large butterfly on her school teacher's desk being kept in a jar. On the day it emerges from its chrysalis, she sees that the jar is too small for the butterfly, an especially large Polyphemus butterfly, to spread its wings. The birth fluids dried in place, it couldn't spread its wings, and blood was not able to spread throughout the blood vessels in the wings. Because of the size of the jar, it was left, because of this, permanently deformed, with crumpled wings that it can't fly with. Her and her classmates released it outside anyway, even though she knew that it would inevitably end up eaten by a bird or perhaps batted to death by a curious cat. Nevertheless, Dillard writes, it was scrawling with what seemed like wonderful vigor, as if, I thought at the time, it was still excited from being born. There's something about this dual sense of both wonderment mixed with human weakness and frailty and anxiety that wonderfully frames this book. And maybe one day soon I'll find Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, or maybe more likely it'll find me, just like this book did. And I'll think of Will again and our long conversations, and so it goes, and so it goes. Wonderful book. If you're interested in the memoir at all, I highly, highly recommend this. An American Childhood by Annie Dillard.